So let's kick off. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ethex's Cuppa Club. Can't remember how many we've done now, but quite a few. I'm Lisa Ashford. I'm CEO of Ethex and Energize Africa, two positive investment platforms in the UK. I'm joined today by Robert Shrimp, who is co-founder and head of Solar for Schools. Robert is one of our repeat projects that has kept coming back to the platform and has quite an innovative model to raise finance for putting solar on the roofs of schools and also engaging children in sustainability issues, which I think is something incredibly important. So we're going to hear a little bit from him today about the history of the organisation and how it came about and what he's been doing for the last few years. For some of you who haven't necessarily been introduced to him before, although we have had you on one webinar before, haven't we? So you're used to this grilling.
Hardly grilling. I'd be looking forward to it. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah. So let's kick off then. So a little bit of housekeeping, sorry. So just to say, this isn't a financial promotion. This is just highlighting all the great work that Solar for Schools is doing. We can't answer any specific questions relating to your own personal financial circumstances. But if you do have questions, please post them in the chat. We'll be chatting today with Robert for about 45 minutes, and I will feed the questions into the conversation, so please feel free to participate. So Robert, let's kick off then. So tell me, how did Solar for Schools originally come about, and why did you choose to focus on schools rather than purely, ground-mounted solar in fields or something like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of good reasons. Thank you for that, and good morning, everyone. The first thing about school buildings is that actually they're a naturally good place to put solar panels on. If you think about them, schools rarely go bust or don't close down, or it's very predictable. They have reasonably large roof space, and they consume electricity mainly during the day when the sun is shining. So from a purely solar perspective, they make a lot of sense. But that's not reason enough on its own. There's another even more compelling reason, is that by putting solar panels on a school, one can show the next generation some of the steps required to decarbonize society. And one of the most exciting things when we go into school and we are doing an initial survey and we involve the students in the survey, and we take a drone with us, we, go around the school taking photographs of it, and they can take a photograph of the drone too. They often ask us, will we decarbonize fast enough? Will we manage to fight climate change? And I go, well, actually, it's in your power to some extent. And they go, really? What can we do about it? And they go, well, did you get what you wanted for Christmas? And they go, yes. I said, well, that's because your parents have your future happiness and well-being in mind. They want you to have a good life, right? But so your responsibility is to learn about what you can do to fight climate change and then help your parents do that. And the number of examples I've had since from people who come back and go, yeah, we've bought an electric car because my children persuaded us, or we've actually eating less meat because my children persuaded us. So children have an incredible power of persuasion to adults. And that's the huge, huge impact. And that's why schools are so special. The impact from putting solar panels on the schools directly in terms of CO2 emissions, in the UK, we might be able to save 500,000 tons of CO2 a year. But the impact from those students understanding the challenges and explaining them to their parents is way, way greater, a factor of 10. I mean, it's quite easy for a student to go back and persuade their parents to cut the family carbon footprint by 1 or 2 tons. And if you have 100 families in a school, that would be 200 tons versus the 20 tons that the school's saving from the solar panels. So it could be a factor of 10. And so that's one of the other reasons. So that's why schools in particular. There is, of course, a huge, huge challenge with dealing with schools, and that is the decision-making process. It's incredibly hard work to get a school across the line. And so I set up a company trying to digitalize that process, and Solar Options for Schools, which is sort of the parallel company to the Solar for Schools CBS where everyone invests in the assets, is developing tools to make it easier to develop these projects, to make it more transparent. And so now a student can go along to a website and see what the potential would be for their school to save carbon, and can be involved in the process of helping that school to take those steps. And this is absolutely key in bringing down the cost of project development, because at the moment in the UK there are no subsidies anymore. So the economics around a project are very, very tight. And if one spends months and months trying to get the project to happen, the cost of doing that would make the project uneconomic. So how do we make getting the project as low cost as possible so that the economics work out? And that's one of the key challenges. And that's why Solar Options raises money to build this platform to bring down the cost of developing projects. And thanks to all the investors in Solar for School CBS, those projects can then be financed and come to happen. So it's the sort of the joint effort between the two. One, bringing down the cost through the technology, and two, through Ethex and the CBS, financing those projects once we manage to get them to happen.
Right, and you mentioned there that, so two things, just remind everybody when you actually started out, and I don't know whether you have off the top of your head how many projects or schools so far you've actually managed to put solar on.
So we started in 2015, and at the time the idea was, could we get a school to sign up for a solar project on a 20-year PPA contract or electricity contract without having to physically go and see the school? Can we do it online just through our website? And the answer was yes, but not on many cases. So we did 2 schools in our first year. We did, I think it was 8 schools in our second year, and 5 of those were a group of schools. So it was one academy. And then I think the following year was 2017, which was a horrible year because the subsidies were completely slashed. We did 1 school that year. That 1 school went ahead, even though they were paying more for the electricity than mains. And the reason they did that was because one of the governors works at the national grid, and he could see where electricity prices are going. And he persuaded the rest of the governors that this was essential for 2 reasons. 1, because they would save money long term, but that was a minor reason. But 2, because he really, really wanted to encourage more students to take up STEM subjects. And he saw it, one of the challenges the UK has going forward is encouraging more people to take up engineering. So one of the things that we do with the educational material is to try and add a little bit of hands-on excitement around understanding energy. We're very fortunate, just got a grant from the UK Innovate to develop a mobile app so that students can develop a project.
Oh yeah, we'll come back to that.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So,
okay, so then back to your question. To your question. So that was 2017, which was a very, very tough year. 2018 was better. I think we did about sort of a dozen projects. 2019 was sort of the end of the subsidies at the time, so it was a bit of a mad rush. And I think the Solar for School CBS, I think, has the record for the number of projects completed by community energy groups in that year. 2020 was difficult. I think we did 6 or 7 projects because it was the last drivers. We've done 7 projects this year so far, and we've got another sort of dozen in the pipeline. Overall, we've done, funded by the CBS, about 60 projects in the UK.
Yeah, okay.
It's still nothing compared to the 27,000 schools in the UK.
Exactly.
A long way to go.
Exactly. So you mentioned the subsidies there and the feed-in tariffs, which were removed. Someone asked a question actually about government policy, and we could probably talk all week about that. But you know, how has that helped or hindered? And how do you still make it work post feed-in tariff?
So when we started the company, we knew that subsidies were going to disappear at some point, and that at some point solar had to stand on its own 2 feet. So we were sort of prepared for that to some extent. What we also realized is that the economics apply differently to different schools. So the larger the school, the easier it is to make the economics work, because you're spreading your sort of kilowatt hours generated, your costs, your development costs across a larger number of units of electricity. So even without subsidies, large schools in the UK work today. Unfortunately, most large schools are academies. And the Department for Education, in its wisdom, chose to say that academies can't sign a 25-year agreement. We've managed to persuade the DfE to sign the agreement for half a dozen schools in the last 6 months. But this is a massive, massive hurdle. So you have this double problem. Small schools can sign, but the economics don't work. Yeah, you'd need to sort of donate £2,000 or £3,000 to a small school for it to then be financed through Ethex and the CBS at 2% plus RPI for the economics to work. So on small schools, we need to find donations. We're working on that. And on large schools where the economics work, we need to get them signed off by the DfE, who currently won't. So the UK, it's really, really challenging. I spent probably a month last year writing a white paper to the DfE, and we've probably had a dozen calls with the DfE so far. And they thought that by setting up a central procurement process, they could encourage more schools to go solar. Having collected feedback from us and others, they're realizing that that's not going to work. And they're finally turning around to the idea that using a digital platform like the one that we've developed in Solar Options for Schools to bring down costs and provide that platform to community energy groups around the country so that they can help develop those projects at low cost would then unlock solar on schools again. So at the moment, the government's not helping at all, but we're slowly turning them around as to what they need to do differently to get there. So hopefully, towards the end of this year, those doors will unlock on the large schools. And in the meantime, we are finding grants and donations to help some of the smaller schools work.
Okay. So whilst we're on the subject of making the model work, how do you factor in the changes in electricity prices going forward?
So that is good news for Solar for Schools and investors in the CBS and Solar for Schools. Probably not such good news generally for the UK, but it's clear that electricity prices are going to continue to go up. They've been going up at over 10% in the last few years. Now they tend to do in steps. So schools tend to sign a 2-year contract or 3-year contract. So it takes a while and then suddenly jumps up a lot. So that helps. And as electricity prices continue to go up, more and more projects become economically viable. So that's good news, but you just have to be patient and wait. Next year, more projects will be viable than this year.
And, you know, what happens if electricity prices don't keep going up?
I think that is unlikely for a number of reasons. One, at the moment, electricity serves sort of 1/3 of our society. We use it for lighting effectively and appliances in our buildings and industry. But there are 2 areas where it's not currently used, and that's for heating. And heating, from an energy perspective, is greater than electricity consumption generally, and transport. So if all cars gradually become electric and all heating becomes electric, that would mean that the total electricity consumption would increase by roughly a factor of 3. Now, we need to generate 3 times as much electricity as we do today, and we need to do that at no carbon emissions. That is going to require a lot more solar, a lot more wind, and as much as I hate to say it, possibly some new nuclear. It's not going to get cheaper. What will happen is time of day pricing will change. So you might get a situation where on a Sunday afternoon, electricity is free, but in the evenings, midweek, it's very expensive.
Thank you. And in terms of the engagement with schools, so you talked about having a new project that's funded by Innovate, which sounds very exciting. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, we're super excited about that. UK Innovate is funding about £150,000 towards developing a mobile app. And the idea is that with this mobile app, students can look up their school on their phone. They can drag modules onto the roof of the school to see what the potential capacity of the school would be. They can see how much carbon the school could save. They can learn about electricity and renewables and energy and about the sun. So there's various learning streams for it. It's all being gamified, so they get points for it. The schools can compete against each other. So the more students that take part and go through the learning objectives in the app or develop a project on their school, the more points they get. So yeah, we're very excited about that. That will be launched in June. You can access a beta version of it now if you go to our website, solarforschools.co.uk, and go to the app at the top, and you can register. And so if anyone has any teenagers, we'd love for them to register and help us test it and develop it.
Good. Well, I'm sure some of our listeners will take you up on that offer. In terms of new schools that want to engage with you, how does the process go in terms of you finding new sites versus people contacting you? What's the balance, and what do organizations or schools do if they would like to work with you?
That's a very good point. Thank you very much for bringing it up. I think, so most schools come to us. It's the cost of advertising to them and the effectiveness of advertising to schools doesn't work, basically. Trying to sell anything to schools is very difficult. The most effective way is if someone at the school finds out about us, goes to our website and registers, and then we then hold their hand and take them through the process. And where bondholders could be super helpful is if you have a strong relationship with the school, either go and look at the website and see if it has suitable potential, or they could drop us an email saying, look, we know the head teacher or the bursar at this particular school. I'd be happy to make an introduction. And those introductions, the conversion rate when someone introduces us to a school is much, much, much higher than for any other channel. So super keen and very, very happy to follow up on any leads or any projects or schools that you have a relationship with to prepare a presentation that you could then take in, or a bondholder or volunteer could take into the school to help that project go forward.
Well, that sounds great. We could put the contact details in the follow-up email.
Yeah.
And I know that from some questions, we've already got some schools that are keen. So there you go. That's at least 2 leads, I think, from the webinar.
Yeah. Someone's asking for the website address too. I see solarforschools.co.uk.
Yes, great.
I'll add it in afterwards.
Yeah. And lots of questions suddenly coming in. Okay, so let's have a look at these.
Seasonal differences. I'm not sure if that's practical. Yes, that's a very good question. One of the challenges is that a school will generate about 3 courses of the electricity in the summer 6 months, i.e. from now until September. But a school will consume 2/3 of its total electricity in the other half of the year. So you have a big mismatch. And that's one of the challenges in terms of trying to match the system size to school. And in some cases, we don't use up the entire roof space on large schools because we'd be generating far too much in the summer that would never be used. So the system is sized such that at least 75 to 80% of the electricity is consumed by the school. And that is basically limited by how much they consume over the summer periods. We can never get to 100% because the school's closed on weekends and holidays. But we try and deal with that. And one of the challenges in the UK at the moment is that the value we get for the electricity that the school doesn't consume, i.e. the electricity that's sold back to the grid, is very, very low. And the cost of collecting it is very high. So often that is wasted. And that's one of the things that, again, we were talking to the Department for Education and BAVES about how to get more value from the electricity that's not used by the school, either through batteries or through other mechanisms, to try and improve the economics on that basis.
Yeah. I mean, is that something that you could incorporate electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and could that be included?
Yeah, we looked into that, and the cost of installing an electric charging point is about £2,000. And if you're then trying to recover that £2,000, you need to sell a lot of electricity over its period. And we thought, wow, it'd be great to put electric charging points in schools and put them in such a place that the local community could then use them too. Unfortunately, because of health and safety, most car parks in schools are now gated. So that's a challenge. So we're hoping to do a couple of trials, but it's not as obvious or as easy as we first thought when we looked into the idea.
Right, fair enough. Hopefully something that could be developed, further in the future. So I'm assuming that it's private schools and state schools. There's no difference there in terms of exactly good.
No, the private schools don't have to get DAP approval, which is an advantage. Private schools tend to have the funds to do it themselves. So in that case, we help them develop the project, we manage the project for them, but those projects don't get funded via the CBS or via Ethex because they have the funds themselves.
True, but presumably, one of the benefits of setting it up within the Community Benefit Society is that the members, become much more engaged in the whole process, which perhaps
and some private schools do that. So we've had a couple of cases where even though they could fund the system entirely themselves and don't need the CBS, they actually like the fact that sort of CBS is a sort of a club they can join. They're sharing the risk, they're sharing the upside, and they get a bunch of other benefits like the education piece. So they actually then put the money for the system into it. It means we don't have to raise more money, or it contributes to the pot, but they are part of that club.
Right, understood. So a couple of technical questions here. In terms of the life expectancy of the panels, and how long does the equipment generally tend to last before it needs to be replaced? And is that built into your model?
Yeah, so the solar panels will last 25 to 30 years. I mean, some panels will degrade and need to be replaced at some point, but the warranties on them are that they'll deliver 80% of their initial output 20 years after they're installed, 25 years after they're installed. And it's very hard to measure the decay of solar panels over that time, even though that's factored into the model. We assume they'll get worse by 0.5% a year, but you really don't see that if you keep them clean and maintain them. Inverters, on the other hand, are not really expected to last more than 10, maybe 15 years. So in the model, we've baked in at least one replacement over the lifetime of the system.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit now about the offer that you have live on the platform at the moment. What's the scale of that? And I know that you have been refinancing some of the previous bonds as well. So if you could just sort of explain a little bit about how that has come together and what the pipeline's looking like for the latest raise.
So the 2 million bond offer currently out on your site, originally about 1.4 million of that was going to be used to refinance some of our bondholders. And we want to refinance those because they were receiving a 5% interest at the time. And if we can reduce the total interest cost to the CBS, we could do some more projects. So by refinancing those, it enables us to do more projects. And they're due for refinancing anyway. Now, interestingly enough, over half of them want to roll over their bonds into the new bonds, which has become apparent. And therefore, of the 2 million, nearly a third, just over a third, is basically, we're going to have to put that to one side. So I think we're in discussions with you about changing the total raised figure accordingly. So that's been spoken for already. Then existing bondholders reinvested again too. So that took up quite a large piece. So I think that the total fundraise on the Ethex platform may shrink to 950,000 in the short term and maybe 1.3 million in the long term, depending on what new projects come on stream. So at the moment we have a dozen projects. We've just built 5 projects, which some of the funding will be used for. We need to pay those bills in the next few weeks. Then we've got a bit of a gap. And then starting in June, we've got about a dozen projects with Leeds County Council. Now, those have partly been grant funded, so they don't require a huge amount of money from the CBS, but they're all going to go into the CBS as part of the pot, which is very interesting. They're funding about 80% of the costs, and the rest are funded by CBS members. And that makes the economics work for the council and works for us. So I think we're going to see more hybrid type situations where they're partly grant funded and partly funded by investors or bondholders. We then have probably 30 or 40 projects where the economics don't quite work at the moment. So we're looking for grants or donations. So some of our bondholders have actually donated their interest in the past. And it's something that I think a few more bondholders might be prepared to do to then help projects. And then we're also working with a couple of utilities to see whether they would sponsor or donate £2,000 or £3,000 to a school project to make it happen. And Good Energies and Octopus are quite interested in this idea. It's still early days, but the idea is that by doing so, we can make the economics work on more projects. One other idea, part of that, is that, and it'd be interesting to hear the feedback from some of the bondholders, is that we would ask our existing bondholders whether they would consider switching over to Octopus, for instance, using a special code. And then for every bondholder that switched, Octopus would then donate £50 towards a project. So it'd be interesting to see some feedback on that, whether that's an idea we should pursue to try and help more projects go forward. Another idea to try and make the economics work that we're looking at is trying to get the carbon credits for them. But the amount of carbon credits you generate versus the value of carbon credits is so low at the moment. More people need to be buying voluntary carbon credits for the price of carbon credit to go up to a point where it makes a difference. It's £1 to £3 of carbon credit. It's just too cheap. It doesn't move the needle on a school.
I think probably with our net zero targets, there will be likely, I would say, a lot more development in that area over the coming years, and more of a focus on, domestic projects, whereas perhaps in the past there's been, a real focus on developing countries. So hopefully some more potential there.
I've got some great questions. Should we pick up a few more of these?
Yes, please do.
How does one influence the county council who are in charge of building new schools? That's a tricky one. But if you are local to that county council, you have a much, much stronger level of influence than we do. So that's why we're very keen to work with local community energy groups. And a local community energy group could literally be 1 or 2 volunteers who get together and say, we want to put solar on buildings. And we're very happy to hear from you, and we're happy to support you and work with you to then work with that council. So the project in Leeds arguably came from an individual who wanted to set up a community energy group in Otley. So we worked with him to develop 4 projects in Otley. And as a result of that, he worked closer and more closely with the council. And as a result of that relationship, the council worked with us to apply for a grant. And those are the 12 next projects we're doing. And those arguably all started from an individual who contacted us and said, how can we work together to approach a council? So very happy to hear from anyone who wants to do that, and very happy to support those efforts. And there's another question that's sort of the flip side of that. Are we inundated by schools approaching us? It varies. Schools have been incredibly busy with some virus that's going around. And surprise, surprise, that has taken up a lot of their attention. And so, no, we're not currently inundated. We get about 2 to 3 schools register a week on our website. But outside COVID periods, that was as many as 2 a day.
Okay. Well, hopefully that attention will start to swing back again, perhaps into the summer term and next year, as people start to be able to look ahead again.
Yeah.
I do have another question that came in prior to the session, which was around, if you remember, it's around the interest. And perhaps you could explain why you've decided to go for a lower flat percentage plus RPI rather than a fixed interest.
So when we did our original bond, it was at 5%, and that was assuming that inflation was 2.7. So in reality, real interest will be able to be 2.3. Yeah. Inflation has actually dropped. At the moment, it's running at about 1%. And why inflation is important to us is because the school signs up to a school agreement where the electricity price they pay is set when they sign up, but it's indexed to inflation. So it goes up with inflation over time. And so what we had is a situation where we were assuming that the income was going to go up by 2.7% a year, but in fact, it's only been going up by about 1% a year. And so we thought, well, that's actually a long-term risk. By linking the interest that we pay to bondholders to the income we make, it reduces the risk to the CBS as a whole, but it's also fairer to bondholders, because if inflation goes up, yeah, receiving 2% is not enough. So receiving 2% plus 5 compensates for that. So in a way, it ensures you're getting 2% above inflation. Whereas at the moment, if a bank's telling you they're getting 1% and inflation's at 1%, you're effectively getting nothing. So it's a management of risk issue. It aligns our income streams to our cost base.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, capital is at risk, and we have to always remind people of that. So there was a question around the timing as well of the interest starting, and when the drawdowns occur.
So on drawdowns, yes. So, and this is one of those, and again, if anyone has any feedback on this, how we manage it. Clearly, raising money takes time and effort. You have to put a prospectus together. Raising £2 million in sort of one big chunk and not being able to deploy it means that you're accruing interest costs, but you haven't got any projects to generate revenue against them, which no one wants. Equally, building projects and not having the money to do it is pretty hair-raising. So you have to somehow balance it. And in a perfect world, money would come in perfectly in time as the projects come in. Mm-hmm. And we do our best to try and bring those two together. And by being able to sort of throttle and control how quickly money comes in through Ethex is one way of doing it. Having a 3-month interest break period allows us a little bit of flexibility too. So it means so that the money is being deployed and is only generating revenue before it has to pay interest. And we try and draw the money down in sort of £250,000 chunks or so to keep administration costs reasonable. And I think we're about to draw down about 400,000 in the next week or so. So that's the first drawdown. So we'll basically, I think, I'm not sure where Josh is on this, but I think the plan is to tally up what we've got at the end of this week and then draw it down next week. Exactly.
Hopefully that answers the question to Ian. So it's incredibly helpful to you as an organization to be able to flex the investment coming in to match it against projects.
So there are a few other questions. Are we working with other countries as well? So yes. So Options, which was sort of the company developing the software and developing the projects, is actually operating in Germany, India. We're looking at projects in Mexico, Palestine, New Zealand, Australia, and a few others. Those will not be funded by the Solar for Schools CBS that's currently on the platform. The plan is to set up a separate Solar for Schools International or Solar for Schools India CBS, and that will then probably raise money in the form of redeemable shares, and it will have a more variable return, given that there are greater upside but greater risks of investing in projects overseas. The biggest risk being exchange rate risks, and we're still trying to work out the balance of risk reward and whether one sets a sort of relatively low expectation and has a large buffer, or one says, okay, it's going to be somewhere between this and this, and if exchange rates don't do anything silly, then you get more, and if exchange rates do something silly, you get less. But we probably won't launch that for another 3 to 6 months until we've got enough pipeline in those countries to do that. In Germany, we raise them through a different structure in Germany, but that only offers, actually in future, it's going to offer less than in the UK. Interest rates here are very low.
Just on that, we touched a little bit about when you joined and set up the organisation, but we didn't talk so much about, your background and who else is part of Solar for Schools. So can you just tell us a little bit about that? Yeah, so maybe 2 words to me. I sort of grew up in South America, then moved to the UK, studied aeronautical engineering, started various internet companies developing software to make associations more efficient. Then joined the dark side and became a venture capital investor. My reason for doing that is I wanted to persuade more capital to support more young entrepreneurs
to try and solve problems in the renewable space. So it was a clean tech. There's two different funds investing in early stage businesses to try and make accelerate the revolution to decarbonize. And actually, that was one of the reasons I ended up setting up sort of schools, because we don't really have a technology problem, we have a mindset problem. And we couldn't persuade enough people of our generation to try new technologies or implement new systems when the ones that were there already worked. Okay, they were dirty, but they worked. And again, that's one of the things that led me to giving up my rather well-paid job as a VC to a very impoverished job as an entrepreneur. It'd be nice to earn a salary one day. But it's the ability to change mindsets. So that's kind of my very brief journey from entrepreneur to vulture capitalist back to sort of social entrepreneur. The rest of the team, I'm super fortunate. Anne, who heads up the UK, has helped over 200 schools over the last decade to go solar. Probably most experienced person doing that ever so far. And then I've recently been joined by a former director of Microsoft who's running our technology team. Most of them are based in India. And recently joined by a CFO who comes from Eon. And so he's sort of very robust in terms of his financials, which is good. Strengthen that part. Yeah, there's about 20 of us spread around 3 countries at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And will the focus always stay on schools, or might you also look at community centres as well?
So working with councils and community energy groups means that typically we start the conversation with a school, but often they then go, well, what about the library, or what about the village hall? So yes, there is one non-school in the CBS, which is a library, which was completed last year. We could justify that on the basis that it's also an opportunity to impart knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was, when COVID passed, that rather than doing a workshop to students, we would have an open day at the library and talk to the local community about energy and carbon. We also under pressure in other countries, not so much of the UK, to do sort of fire stations and other buildings. And so we've said, yes, we will do those on the condition that we can still charge the same annual fees, that we can still do the education piece. And then what often is done is that they then allocate another school or kindergarten that couldn't have solar because it's too small. And the budget that would have been used for that building is then used to then deliver education in another building. Mm-hmm. So that's how it works. So yes, I think we will do other council buildings, but that's driven by the council. You know, if they've got 10 buildings and 7 of them are schools, it seems silly not to do all 10.
Right.
But it's not the driver.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any last questions we should pick up before we draw to a close?
So just quickly on 2 things. One, why are higher electricity prices better? Only in that the solar price, the price that the school pays for the solar panels is compared to what they're paying for mains. And the more expensive mains, the more room we have to make the economic viable. So in the moment, in lots of schools in the UK, we could deliver solar electricity at about 14p. Yeah, if they're currently paying 12, it's very difficult for them to put solar on. If they were paying 15 and they're saving a penny, then it would do it. So that's why the higher mains electricity prices are, we're easier for the solar project to then come under that price. And then another point on batteries, yes, we applied for a 1.5 million grant, which sadly we didn't get, but we're going to try again, to put batteries in 20 schools. We're doing about 6 megawatt hours of battery, I mean, a lot of battery. And the idea was to then use the day-night time difference, plus support the grid to generate additional revenues by providing grid support services. And that was a joint application with support from the National Grid and Octopus. But it was an incredibly competitive grant. But we're going to try again. So yes, we'd love to put batteries in schools. The moment the economics don't work, we need a grant to make it happen.
Great. Thanks, Robert. As ever, really interesting to talk to you and just get, an appreciation of what you're doing right now in terms of the offer that's on the platform, but also your vision, ambition for the future, which is, quite extraordinary given given the size of the organization. You've got strong ambitions to go international, to do more in the UK, and do other things like this education app as well. So I think this is really fantastic.
We have to. I mean, the task ahead of us is huge. And unless we can somehow educate, I mean, most countries around the world can barely afford to teach their students to read and write, let alone carbon literacy. Yeah. So unless we can roll out solar to thousands of schools around the world, and do so within the next decade, we're not going to move the needle. So yes, we have to push hard.
Okay. And if we didn't just answer one of the questions finally, so in an ideal world, how many schools would you like contacting you every week?
So I say that our vision is to get to a point where we can support 2,000 schools a week going solar worldwide. That sounds like a lot. That's 100,000 schools a year. It would still take 20 to 30 years to do them all.
How many can you cope with though?
Well, the idea is that by developing the software tools, community energy groups and volunteers can do most of it. So we would provide the support and the process, but the idea is to enable a growing army of volunteers around the world to be able to do the projects using our tools.
Good. That sounds exciting and ambitious. And I wouldn't expect anything less from you. So thanks very much, Robert. Just to say, yes, this is we always record our Cuppa Club webinars. So it will be on the website. We'll follow up with another email and provide some links as well to the website. If you haven't read the share offer document, which provides all the details for this particular offer that's live at the moment, please do read that, because that obviously contains all of the information that's pertinent to that particular investment. And it's great to catch up, Robert, and I hope we'll be able to do this again very soon.
That'd be great. Thank you.